I'm very excited about today and our special guest. We have a former Racker. He is actually account manager number 7, which now we call our customer success managers. Lorenzo Gomez with us. He is currently the CEO of Geekdom. He is also an author. His first book was the Cilantro Diaries, which has some great storytelling around lessons that he's learned along the way to build and evolve his career. What we're going to talk about today and what Lorenzo is going to highlight on is how to build your personal board of directors and the importance of cultivating these relationships and having great allies and mentors along the way. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce live virtually Lorenzo Gomez.
Hey everybody. Hello, Racker World. Thank you for having me. I'm just so honored to be back with my Racker family. So I'm so touched and I appreciate you inviting me for the chat, even for a little bit. So you want me to just jump in?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started.
Let's do this. All right. So a couple things. I'm gonna walk everybody through a presentation I have that's based on my first book, and quick caveat for everybody too. I'm the weird, creepy cat guy, and so I have 4 cats, and at any one point in time, they're gonna come and harass me and boss me around, which is what they do. So just please forgive me. That's my one disclaimer. I'm going to share my screen right now so you can see this presentation, and what I'll do is I'll go through the presentation and then we'll have some time for Q&A after that. So let me do this and make sure that I got it. All right. All right. Can I get someone to just give me an audio that you can see this?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So this presentation is titled "My Best Advice to You." Just a little bit about me. So I was one of the first 100 employees at Rackspace. I was very honored. I was a young guy from San Antonio that really should never have gotten hired, but I'm very thankful that I did. And I left Rackspace. There's one logo not on this slide, which is a little company called City Voice. When I left Rackspace, I went to this startup that didn't last very long. I really just put it on there because every tech person needs their I went to a startup that failed badge, for their wall. And then for the last about 8 or 9 years, I've been working directly for Graham Weston, former chairman of Rackspace. I ran Geekdom for about 5 or 6 years, and I started his 80/20 Foundation, which is a private foundation, and I'm chairman now of both Geekdom and 80/20 Foundation. And then when Uber and Lyft left San Antonio about 6 years ago, myself and a couple of other guys co-founded a nonprofit called Tech Block to get rideshare back. And so I've been really heavily involved in sort of helping to get the tech scene started in San Antonio. And it's sort of the mission of, Rackspace really had a profound effect in San Antonio and really changed our city for the better. And so we're trying to create an ecosystem where the next Rackspace can be born. So that's sort of what I focus on. So this presentation is based on a book called the Cilantro Diaries. And when I published it, I thought my mom was just going to buy 10 copies and call it a day. And it did really well. And I was just very thankful for the community that responded. And it got #1 in 4 categories on Amazon the day it came out. And it was the #1 new release on Audible when I released it. And so I was really thankful for that. I'm involved in sort of production of a couple of podcasts, The Brand Brothers, which is a branding one. It's sort of a nerdy podcast on branding, but the one I think that is applicable to Rackers is Obey Your Strengths. And this is a podcast just on Strength Finder. And it's hosted by a woman who also was a former Racker named Kathy Kirsten, who did Strength Finder training. And it's really amazing. And I recommend everybody that's a Racker check it out. She has some really great storytelling on there. All right, so let me dive right into the presentation here. So this presentation is it's my best advice for you, but I want to start with the great lie because I think that in tech especially we're really bad at this. And the great lie is this notion that everybody that is this titan of our industry, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, although in these days he's sort of in some hot water, But it's this notion that these really larger than life personalities, they did it all by themselves. And that it's the lone wolf that gets to the very top. And I would just like to submit to you that that's not true, that no man and no woman is an island, that you really can't do it by yourself, that your career and life is really a team sport. And so I want to change that narrative, and hopefully I'll submit a case to you to do that today. And so I would say that everybody needs a team. And so I want to talk about some famous teams, right? And so, I always tell people that, Jesus never rolled by himself. He rolled with a posse. And he surrounded himself with a team of guys that could go do his work. But my other favorite team was the Godfather, right? And in this picture, behind the Godfather, you have one of the most, famous counselors in history. It was Tom Higgins, played by Robert Duvall, and he was the consigliere, right? He was the counselor of the Godfather. And I thought to myself, when the Godfather and Jesus have something in common, it just has to be true. It's just got to be true, right? They both had counselors. They both had a team. And so I want to tell you that when you have a team, another way to frame it is this one slide. And this is the one big idea that I would like to submit to you today. And if you forget all the other parts of this presentation, this is the one I want you to remember, is that everybody needs a personal board of directors. And I have come to believe this in my career, and I will put this up against anybody, that wants to debate it, but it's just such a game-changing principle. And I want to tell you the story of how it came about. I didn't know what a board of directors was when I started at Rackspace. And so I started at Rackspace in 2001. And I don't know if you guys still do this, but when I was there, we had an open book meeting every month. And every month, Lanham on the right and Graham on the left would get the whole company in a room. And I remember the first open book I went to, there was probably 60 people in the room. And they would throw all the financials up on the screen. They would walk us through the P&L, the balance sheet. And it just blew my mind that these guys were so transparent. And I was a 20-year-old kid with no college degree. And I thought, how are they trusting me with this information? And it really was really special. And I just remember I learned so many things during those open books. I remember once when they created the precursor to enterprise, which was called intensive. And they said, there's this principle called the Pareto principle, otherwise known as the 80-20 rule. And we've realized that 80% of our revenue comes from 20% of our customers. And so we're going to take those 20%, move them into their own department called intensive, and sort of profile them so we can get more. And I just thought, wow, like I'm getting my own MBA class, just being here. And I remember one day at Open Book, Graham and Lanham said something about the board of directors. And when they said it, I'd never heard this term before. And when they said it, I felt like their whole body language changed. They got super respectful, like they were in a church, and it was like, we have to present this plan to the board of directors. And in my head, when I'm replaying the movie, the room got dark and some prayer candles kind of like appeared behind them. And I leaned over to the guy next to me and I said, hey man, what's a board of directors? And this guy said, well, somewhere out there are 10 men and women, about 10 men and women that the CEO and executives go to for counsel and advice. And they're called the board of directors. And they're the only one, they help set the strategy for the year, but they're the only people that have the authority to hire and fire the CEO. And I just thought to myself, you're telling me that this dude, Lanham, who has a Harvard, MBA, who's one of the smartest guys I've ever met, have people they go to for counsel and advice? And he said, yes. And I was like, you're blowing my mind right now. And the reason it blew my mind was I grew up in a culture that said that the boss had to know all the answers or pretend to have all the answers. And here were the leaders of Rackspace showing me that they intentionally and openly talked about going to get counsel and advice. And it just blew my mind. And as the guy that I was talking to sort of kept trying to explain more of the board of directors, I stopped listening to him because all I could imagine in my head was the Jedi Council. And I thought for sure that everybody in the board had to have a big bushy beard. If you're a Tolkien fan, it was the Council of Elrond, right? And I thought, if you don't have a Gandalf hat in that room, you're just not doing something right. And so it was this notion that, I need a Jedi Council just like these really super smart guys do. And so I want to tell you my story quickly about how I accidentally fell into a personal board of directors, because I want to give you the principles so that you can do it more intentionally than I did and faster and get further down the road than I did. And so I want to talk about my first job. This is my first official job where I actually paid taxes. My first job was working as free slave labor for my father. I come from a big Mexican family of 7 kids. There's 4 boys. And so every weekend, every holiday, every summer, we were building houses. My dad used to build houses. And I just hated it. I mean, my hands are very soft. They were made for a computer, not for, post hole diggers and sheetrock. And so my older brother, Danny, said, bro, if you don't want to dig another hole, you better get a job as soon as you turn 16. And I was like, word. And so as soon as I turned 16, I applied everywhere I could, Pizza Hut, McDonald's, and nobody would call me back. And I just realized that I was an anonymous dude with nothing that the business world valued. And I didn't have any skills. I didn't have any, I didn't have a Rolodex. I had nothing. And so my mother came up with this really great idea. She said, your brother used to work at Handy Andy, which is a grocery store that doesn't exist anymore in San Antonio. She said, and they really loved him there. Why don't you see if he can get you an interview? So my brother called and got me an interview with the manager because he was really beloved there. So I went in for my interview at Handy Andy, and I had never done an interview before, and so I didn't know I didn't have a resume. So I walked in with all of my report cards and perfect attendance awards, and it was just really sad. And none of that mattered because the manager came up to me as a really nice guy named Mr. Diaz, and the interview went down just like this. I'm going to reenact it for you. He sort of looked me up and down, and he said, so, you're Hector Gomez's brother, huh? Yes, sir. You work hard like your brother? Yes, sir. He said, okay, you're hired. You start in 2 weeks. And I realized that like every job I've gotten since then has been some iteration of that. And I want to hit you with your first principle, which is it's not what you know, it's who you know. And this principle is about relationships and the relationship building that you need in your life. What you know matters after the who. Right? You need to be able to do your job. You need to be awesome. But the who part is the relationship part. And so I want to pose a couple of questions to you as the audience, which is, how are your relationships? My brother had established a currency that I didn't know was a currency, which was his reputation. And his currency was so valuable and so high that I was able to trade on his currency. And I had never realized that because I had nothing the business world valued. And so when you start with nothing, your reputation is your only currency. And so I ask you another question, which is, how high is your currency? Is your currency high enough to where someone would put their name on the line for you to refer you like my brother did? Or is it low? Because there are many people in my career that I haven't put my name on the line for because I knew they'd bring my currency down. And the other question I want to ask you as the audience is there a Hector in your life that you need to send an email or a text to today and tell them thank you? Is there someone in your career that has put themselves on the line for you, that opened the door for you to get your first try? Because if you have that person, I would submit that you need to thank them today. So I was working at Handy Andy. I had got my start. But in the grocery world in South Texas, there is only one Nordstrom. There is only one winning team in the grocery world. And during this pandemic, it's certainly even more true. And that's H-E-B. And I desperately wanted to work at H-E-B. And this is H-E-B number 5, which is the H-E-B near my mom's house where I grew up. And every one of my siblings except my little sister worked at this H-E-B. And so I wanted to continue the Gomez legacy. But I couldn't get in. And actually, I'm going to pause here and do a shout out because there is a racker amongst you right now logged in named Daniel De Leon. And he and I both worked at HEB number 5 at the same time. And he was one of my first mentors. While we were on opposite check stands, we would talk to each other. And he knew my family. And so I just want to say, what's up, Daniel? Thanks for everything that you've ever did, man. And so I wanted to work at HEB number 5. And so my sister, who was working there, got me an interview, and I got in. And so I was loving it. I started as a bagger. I was quickly promoted to a cashier. I can still tell you that the produce code for bananas is 4011 or 4237, and that avocados are 4046. That's what a good checker I was. But I really wanted the promotion and the job I really wanted was in the produce department. And for some reason, I had a big dude crush on all the guys in produce. They all had super cool Nike Air Jordans, and I just thought they were cool. And they got their own box cutter and knife, and I just thought that was sweet. And so I finally got promoted into the produce department, and I thought life couldn't get any better. And I was working there. I learned so much at HEB. And then one day I got a call from this guy right here. And Dax is one of my very first personal board directors. So Dax Moreno is my best friend since we were 15. We met in the bus at Health Careers High School. And he's also a former racker that I'm just proud to call my friend. And he and I went to high school together. He was working at another HEB. And he called me one day and he said, hey man, I left HEB. I went to this small computer store and it's super cool. I'm the youngest sales guy and I'm the youngest person at the whole place. I'm in sales and I'm crushing it. I'm just kicking butt. And my boss asked me this question. He said, do you have any friends that work hard like you? And I said, yeah, I've got one friend named Lorenzo. And he said, I want you to quit produce and come work at this computer store. And I said, bro, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Like computers, there's no future in computers. And do you have any idea how fresh the cilantro is this season, bro? I'm not just going to give that up to go work at computers. And he was like, come on, man. And so I politely turned him down. But the reason Dax is on my personal board is because, you know, he saw my potential and he was not going to let it go. And so Dax called me for 2 weeks straight and said, you're being an idiot. Stop being an idiot. Come work at this computer store. And so finally he, you know, being a good sales guy, he switched his tactic and he said, you know, it's a 25-cent raise, right? And I was like, whoa, that's big cash back in the day. And I said, why didn't you start with that sales pitch, bro? And so I quit. I decided to quit produce at HEB and I went to this computer store called Gateway Computers. And there's some of you on this Zoom conference that probably bought one from us. And if you bought one from me specifically, I want to say I'm sorry because I know I didn't sell you the warranty and you definitely needed it. So I went to Gateway and I was Gateway's worst sales guy, but I started as a receptionist. So I was the person who would kind of put your name on the clipboard and let you talk to a sales guy. But something really happened at Gateway that was really cool. The first thing was, it's where I learned about the internet and hardware. And one day, one of the sales guys there said, Lorenzo, it's time for you to learn what a server and what a computer are. So he took this tower computer, took it apart, and he said, you see that thing right there? That's your processor. It's like the engine in your car. And this is your hard drive. It's like the closet in your house where you store everything. And he explained all these things to me, and I thought, oh my God, I'm such a hacker right now. Like I'm so smart with computers. And then he said, hey, you need an email address. And I said, what's an email address? And he was like, oh man, this kid's lost. And so he helped me kind of create my very first lgomez123@hotmail.com email address, which is still active. So if you email it, you'll just go with all my spam emails. But I was super excited to be learning about the internet. And that is sort of where my love for learning was born. And one day I met another guy there named James Brem, and he had moved from Gateway Corporate down to San Antonio because his mom lived here. And he was an amazing sales guy. He left Gateway and he called me one day and he said, hey, I'm at this crazy tech company in downtown San Antonio. It's super small. And I think we're hiring and I think you should come work here. But I got to tell you, I got to give you a couple warnings. It's a super small company. And I think it'll probably go out of business in 2 years, but I think we have enough money for at least a year. And, but what's cool is every week they buy us food for the whole company, whatever we want. Like they just pass around menus. And I was like, what? They pass around just whatever you want? He said, yeah, whatever you want. And I thought, well, that's cool. And so I went to interview at this company called Rackspace that did this thing called hosting. And so I Googled what hosting was and I read it and I still didn't know what it was. And my mom said, what are you going to do? And I said, it's something like hosting. And she was so confused. She's still confused. So I said, Mom, I just work for the internet. Let's just call it a day and say I work for the internet, right? So I went, I got an interview. I got a job offer for $30,000 salary, which was, ginormous amounts of money for me. And I almost didn't take the job. And the reason I almost didn't take the job was when I got the job offer from Rackspace, all of my insecurities came out. And I thought to myself, I told myself this story, which was a lie, which was, you don't know what hosting is, and you're never going to know. And when someone meets you at Rackspace, they're going to quickly realize that you don't know what you're doing. And they're going to say, this guy's stupid. And they're going to walk you out the building, and you're going to leave embarrassed and disgraced. And all because of this insecurity, I almost turned down the job of a lifetime. But luckily for me, one of my personal board members is the chairman of my board is my big brother, Danny. And my big brother, he's the chairman of my board, and I assure you that he loves me, even though in this picture he looks like he's trying to stab me in the brain with a pencil. And so I've always gone to my big brother Danny for counsel, and so I went to him and I told him my dilemma, and he said, "Hey man, before you turn this down, let's just chill out and ask some questions." And he said, "Do you think that there are some people there that you could maybe learn from?" And ask questions, to and learn what's going on. And I said, yeah, man. I said, look, I said, everybody in that building's smarter than me, so I'm sure there's someone I can learn from. And he said, well, do you think there's some new skills that you can learn that you don't have? And I was like, yeah, I don't know what they do, so I'm sure everything will be new. And he said, well, I think you should at least give it a shot, man. There's no harm in trying. And he goes, and look, what's the worst thing that happens? If you get fired, who cares? You'll go back to HEB, go back to Gateway. They loved you there. He goes, but I think you need to give it a shot. And so I was so thankful that he encouraged me to take the job. So I accepted the job, and this is not hyperbole. This is not exaggeration. Accepting the job at Rackspace changed my life, and I'm so thankful. And so my next question to you is, do you have an encourager on your board? Someone, and that's different from someone who will flatter you, someone who sees your potential and that will encourage you the right way, because if you don't, you need that person. So I'm working at Rackspace. I'm the 7th account manager. I'm loving life. And one day my boss was this really amazing woman named Anna Bowman came up to me. And she said, Lorenzo, the UK, we have a UK office. There's 10 people in it. And they have one account manager. And she's going on holiday, which in Europe means, 10 months off. And we need someone to go cover all of her accounts. So cover all the UK accounts and train the second account manager that they just hired. And we want to send you. And she didn't say this. She didn't say what I'm about to say, but this is what I heard. And she said, and you're the only loser with no girlfriend and no dog and no house and no wife and no kids. And so we're sending you. And so she said, do you have a passport? And I said, what's a passport? She was like, oh boy. So my boss, Anna, drove me to the FedEx off of Broadway and helped me fill out a form to get a passport. And I was very thankful. And so she put me on the second plane of my entire life and sent me to London. And it was just amazing. And while I was there, I sat next to the managing director. The office was 10 people, very small. And his name was Dominique Monkhouse. And we just became really good friends. And so my month was over. I came back to the U.S. And before I left, Dom said, hey, man, you need to come work here in the UK, and I can get you like a 5-year visa. But I really like how you work. Why don't you move over here? And like everything I've done in my career, I was like, that's dumb, bro. Like, I don't know. Like, what? Move to the UK? That's so dumb. And my mom was really mad when I actually went over there, because my mom did not want me to leave Texas. And she was like, you better not date a British girl. They talk funny. And I was like, Mom, that's pretty racist. You can't say that. And so my family was not down with me going. So I went. It was amazing. So every quarter, Dom would come to the U.S. for the leadership meeting, and he would come by my cubicle, and he would say, hey, man, the offer still stands if you want to move to the UK. And every time I would turn him down. And finally, after like the 4th or 5th time, he came by my desk, and I shared a cubicle with an amazing woman named Jessica Gracia, but she goes by Jake. And Jake was one of the first, 10, 15-ish account managers at the company. And she was like my big sister. I really loved and respected her, and still do. I still talk to her and her husband. And she was a very worldly person, the first worldly person I ever met. She was from Chicago. She worked in Italy, had a career in New York. She read books for fun, which was weird to me. And I just really respected her. And one day after Dom came to my desk and left, Jake turned around and she put the smack down on me. And she was like, you are being a total idiot. And you need to move to the UK right now, mister. And I was like, Jake, what are you talking about? We have such a good thing going. Like, what do you want to send me away? And she said, you need to go to the UK and experience the world, because I know you haven't. And I know you won't if you don't do this. And she goes, and I also know that you're afraid. You're afraid that you're going to miss out. But let me tell you something. You're going to go to the UK and come back, and all your friends are going to be doing the same thing, talking about the same stuff, hanging out at the same bar. You're not going to miss anything. And because I respected her and I had deputized her to push back on me, that I took her advice and I went home and I told my parents I was moving to the UK, which they were very angry at. My mom did talk to me for like 2 weeks. And so I want to submit to you, the audience right now, who do you have in your life that can fight you respectfully? Who can give you the hard truths the way Jake did to me? Because had I not deputized her to my personal board, any other person that said what she said to me, I would have punched in the face. And so I think, this is a principle that I know to be true, that everybody needs in their life and on their board, someone who can give them the hard truths. But when you give someone the hard truth, it has to be in love. Someone that gives you the hard truth doesn't do it to wound you. They're not going to verbally assassinate your self-esteem or your character. You need someone that is looking out for you, but is not afraid to fight you, to tell you that you're wrong or that you're self-deceived. And I'm so grateful for Jake because she did that for me, and it really did change the game. And so I moved to the UK, and I had never traveled. I had only left Texas once to go to Mexico and Vegas, and then I went to the UK and I just experienced this whole other world. And I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. I went to go run with the bulls in Spain. My mom didn't talk to me for a month after that, and just really changed the way I viewed the world. And all of that because one board member decided to fight me and decided to push back and give me the hard truth. And so I want to give you this principle, which is you need one, right? People ask me, how many people do you need on your personal board? And one good counselor is enough. One good counselor, one good friend that you can ask the tough questions, the questions that you can't Google, is really enough. And you can get other board members, which is fine. But I think that if you have one wise counselor, they will not let you fall into ruin, as the good book says. This is one of my favorite quotes from my mentor, Graham, and he says, "A mentor is someone who believes in your potential." And I think that when you look back and I reflect upon my story, one of the things that you see over and over in my story are people that were on my board who saw my potential and weren't afraid to fight me, to push me to fulfill the potential that they saw in me. And so the question I have for you is, who in your life sees your potential? Because you need to bring those people closer to you. You need to deputize them to have the tough conversations, because you won't achieve as much as you can without them. So normally when I'm giving this speech to people in person, I always say they could be next to you, like Dax was sitting next to me on the bus ride. And so normally I always tell people, hey, turn to the person on your right and left and tell them they might be good enough to be on your personal board. But I think you all should chat with someone and shoot a text or a chat or an email to someone and just tell them you might be good enough to be on my personal board. So this is the sort of abridged version of one of the principles in my book, The Cilantro Diaries. And so if you want to read the in-depth version of it, you can get the book on Amazon. You can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you want. I'm totally open to questions. But we'll go to Q&A now, if that's okay. And I hope I didn't speed through much to that, Adriana. I hope that was a good pace for you guys.
Yeah, that's fantastic. First off, thank you so much. It looks like some Q&A is starting to come in. So let's take the first question. I'm gonna go ahead and put answer live here. So one of the questions, the wise counselor for the board, should they know the industry that you're in, the one you want to shift to, maybe not know anything about your career? Any thoughts or guidance around that?
Yeah, great question. I'll tell you, they don't have to know your industry, but I think that Malcolm Gladwell has a book called The Tipping Point, and in The Tipping Point, he outlines the sort of the different characters that are involved in getting a movement started, and one of the characters is called a maven. And a maven is someone who has deep domain expertise in one thing. And when I read that book, I thought about a couple of guys in my world. And so one of them is a guy named Vladimir Mata. You know, he and I were account managers, and he was actually the first BDC in the whole company. And I remember he was a maven in all things cars. Like, he loves cars. He would get a new car like every, second year. But he could tell you everything there was to know, and he was a maven to me. And I have another friend who I also went to high school with named Luke Owen, and he was my maven in all things tech. And so I think that it's really up to you whether you want to have a maven on your board. But I do think that everybody needs to have mavens in their world, right? And so you have to have relationships. And so, one of the things that I learned from working with Graham Weston directly is that Graham has this Rolodex of people that are mavens, domain experts in their fields. And so if you have a question about nonprofit tax accounting, he goes, I got a guy. Boom, he calls him. Now, I doubt that guy is on his personal board, but he's definitely in his network. And so I think that, you need to have people that you're in great relationships with that are mavens that can help you decipher very specific things. But I think the people that you choose to put on your board can go beyond domain knowledge, that really understand you and how you tick, and that you want to be in community with. And maybe that's a better way to frame it, is the people on your board you want to be in community with, so they understand what's going on in your personal life, right? They understand what's going on, your quirks, your wounds, your vulnerabilities. All of these things, I think, are what make a board member. If they happen to be a maven, great, but I don't think they necessarily have to be. Does that answer the question?
I think so. We'll see now in this the new virtual.
Right.
Yeah, you have a follow up to that. Go ahead, and please keep the questions coming in the Q&A. Lorenzo, I'm curious too on, obviously you have your close friends that you knew were great truth tellers for you and could tell you all of those pieces. What if there's somebody that you've admired from afar and your relationship with them may not be as strong as, your older brother? How, what are your recommendations for how do you get this person onto your board? How do you look to them for advice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that in my career, there have been people that I've wanted to be on my board that haven't, but I'll settle for them being an advisor or a mentor. And I think that, the qualification is to be in personal community with them. And so I tell a story about a guy who used to be the CFO of Rackspace. His name was Brian Thompson. And we were roommates in the UK for a while. And I just really admired him. He was just such a brilliant guy. He was so, one of the many reasons I loved him was he was in charge of his emotions. And so many times I felt like my emotions dragged me around. And like I rode the bull, and so many times I couldn't control my feelings. And he was just in control. And so I remember, I wasn't in a position to be in deep personal community and friendship with him, but I would always call him for advice, and he would always very generously give it. And so in many ways, I would have taken him on my board, and I would say that, eventually we got to a place where he was on my board. But I started with just making him an advisor and a mentor. And I remember, and this story's in the book, I was at Rackspace. I hated my boss. Shocker, I'm sure. And I'm sure none of you guys have experienced that. And so I called him. He was the managing director of the UK at the time. And I called him and I was like, oh, my boss sucks. He's blah, 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 blah. And I wanted him to agree with me. And he sat there very patiently listening. And I got done, and he said, okay, are you done? And I said, yes. And he said, are you ready for my feedback? And I was like, yes. And I thought, here we go. Brian's going to agree with me. It's going to be awesome. And he said, you need to immediately cease and desist now and forever saying all of these really politically charged things and getting people riled up. And you need to stop, and you need to go back and do your job and have a good attitude. And I was on the phone. I remember I was pacing the parking lot at Data Point, and I was like, okay. And I was so bummed. But the reason I say that is, at the time he wasn't on my board, but I had given him permission to speak a hard truth to me as an advisor, as a mentor, as someone that I looked up to, because I knew that this guy didn't have a dog in the fight. And I knew he was looking at me objectively, and I knew he told me something that I needed to hear. And I'm very grateful for that feedback, because that was a turning point of my attitude while I was at Rackspace, when I was in a downturn. And so I do think that there are times when you admire people, and they're just going to forever sit in the category of mentor or advisor or someone you meet with. But sometimes you'll get to a point, like I did with Brian, where you invite them to be on your board once you've built up enough, I think, personal cred with them.
Oh, great. Thank you. Another question in somewhat similar context. How do you get counselors outside of friends and family?
Oh, wow. It's funny. I think like all things, it starts with how do you build relationships. And I think one of the best books I've ever read on that is by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I think that it's probably the number one book on all soft skills and the things that people want to hear, the things that really, because I think that you have to start with building a relationship with people. One of the things that I loved at Rackspace when I was there was this notion that everybody had their strength finder on their cubicle. And the brilliance of it was it just gave me one little data point to start one little conversation. Oh my God, you're an activator, I have activator too. Like, oh, please, let's not have another meeting. Okay, let's just activate, right? And finding the common ground where you can start building on a relationship. And so I think that, to me, it is hard, because what I feel like in the tech world is really bad at this is so much of the world is very transactional. Hey, what can you do for me? What can I do for you? Is there an equal value exchange? Cool. If not, why am I wasting my time? And I would submit that that is not the best way to go about it. I think that you have to start with relationships first. And the bad part about relationships is they take time, right? They're not quick sales. Can't close them same day, right? You have to build on trust, which I think leads to another question that people ask that is, you can go to someone for counsel and advice for years and maybe even never have them on your board. But I think that if you look at someone across the cubicle or across the call center and you say, I really want to know that person better because I really like their worldview, I like their counsel and advice, I think the best way to start is how do you start building a relationship with them? And sometimes it's even, hey, can I get you coffee, or can I treat you to lunch because I want to pick your brain? And I think that people want to be viewed as having great advice to give people. And so I think if you ask someone, hey, I really want to pick your brain and get advice from you, most people will respond positively, because people want to feel valued and feel like they have something to contribute. And I think that, I forget what book it was I read, but someone said, if you ever want to get your email responded back to, put in the subject line, I need your advice. And I think that it goes same for people that you want to approach that you're not friends with. If you go to someone and say, hey, I've seen the work that you do and I've admired it, and I want to pick your brain for advice because I think you have a lot to give, I think that you'd be hard pressed to find someone that will take it out.
No, great guidance. Because I've also heard too, like, you starting emails with, I need your help, please. Because most people want to help and feel like they are of service, and advice, definitely mental. Yeah. So another question, we've got a lot of good questions coming in. This is good. I'm glad we've got time for this.
Yeah, thank you.
What advice would you give a young person who is from a background similar to yours? Leave a close-knit family and go into the great unknown?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. So one of the things that, if I'm really honest with myself, there was a period of time, and specifically when I started working at Rackspace, and probably before, where my family was my family. And I want to talk about my parents. My oldest brother was always on my board because he didn't know anything about the internet, but he knew me. And he always had my best intentions in mind, and he would give me great advice. My parents, though, there was a season where I did not go to them for counsel. Not that they didn't love me, but they couldn't help me. They couldn't help me in the new tech world. They wanted me to be safe. They didn't want me to take risks, right? They grew up very poor. And so I would politely listen to them, but I knew I had to build another circle of counselors in this new technology world that I didn't know anything about, that I could go get counsel and advice from. And so I think that if you're someone that came from a similar background, I'm not saying to throw away the advice, because so many things, and actually I start my book, Cilantro Diaries, with the 9 principles that my parents taught me. And half of them are about human nature. And I still use those, and I use them every day. One of them was, my dad always said, if in doubt, there's no doubt. And if in doubt, there's no doubt is about trusting your gut. And I think that, Malcolm Gladwell in his book, Blink, has a great notion about thin slicing, about how your brain is constantly crunching data, and how when your gut instinct is to do something, there's actually a whole bunch of data behind that in your brain. But my dad's way of saying that was, if in doubt, there's no doubt. And so I did not abandon the principles and rules and counsel that my family gave me. I just knew that when it came to certain things like work, they weren't going to be helpful. And so it was up to me to go create a new network to get the expertise and counsel that I needed to help me along the career. And now it's funny, I'm going to turn 40 this year, and I cannot get enough of my parents' counsel. I savor every second of it. And so, but there was a season where I never went to them for advice. And so if you came from a similar background like I did, I think that it's your mission is to go out into the world. And I think that if you're a racker specifically, you are at a tremendous advantage, because that building is full of super duper brilliant geniuses. And it's just always been inspiring to me how everybody I ever met was just so brilliant. And so I think you're in a target rich environment to get ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. Another good question, and lots of thank yous for joining us today as well. So what are some of the things that you do to keep your relationships strong with your board of directors?
That's a great question. So I think that in order to be in community, it's work, and you can't set it and forget it. And which is why I think that most of the time you'll have a small board. And I'll give you an example. When I was living in London, there was one guy specifically. He was a Norwegian, brilliant guy named Jan Anderson, one of my all-time #1 dude crushes. And we were board members from the day we met. But when I moved home, the geography, our separateness, just didn't make it possible for us. I would still call him a board member, but we rarely talk. And so he's not in tune with my life right now, which means he couldn't give me specific counsel on what to do because he doesn't know what's going on. But I trust him I love him. I would do anything for him. And so I think one of the variables you have to have for a board member is constant community. And what that means for you is defined by you. Is that monthly check-ins? One of my board members is a guy named Luke Owen. And, we probably talk maybe once or twice a year. But he and I have the relationship where we can talk and it's like no time has passed. There are other people. I talk to Dax every other day, every third day, right? We're just, that's how we're wired. And so I think you have to define, but I do think that you have to be in a position where you can be in regular community with that person. For some people, it's coffee. For some people, it's a phone call. I really think that it's up to you and the rhythms of your life. But I do think that, if you're going tremendous amounts of time where you don't talk, I just think it's not a good candidate for you. I think that you have to invest. And also, I do think that when you look at your board members, a lot of times it's sort of like dating. There are times where you just need to listen, where you're not trying to solve the problem, where you just need to let them vent. There are a lot of times where the best thing to do is to just sit there in silence and be a supportive board member and just let people process things in their own way. And so I think that one of the other things too that I do specifically is I'm very direct in telling my board members what I need. And so I have a board member named Randy Smith. He used to work at Rackspace. And we have this language where we'll call each other and say, I need to have a board meeting right now. And when we say that, that means I'm going to tell you a story and I need you to help me sift through the story and make sure that I'm looking at it right, and that I'm not going to make a mistake. And so he'll call me on the way from New Braunfels and say, hey, can we have a board talk? And I'll go, yeah. And it's just, he needs to get it out. He needs to bounce an idea off with someone. There are other times where I'll call, like my friend Dax, and I'll say, we need to have a board moment, and I need you to speak the hard truth to me because I'm so mad right now. I can't tell if I'm looking at this thing objectively or if I'm super self-deceived and I'm just seeing red because I'm so pissed off. And I'm giving him permission, and also I'm being very vulnerable, right? Like, hey, I'm really mad and I'm not seeing straight because I want to punch someone. And I need you to see if I'm justified, or it's like, hey, dude, I really think you need to calm down. I think you misinterpreted that. There's two sides to every story, right? And so I think that what are the things if you tell your board members specific things, they will follow suit with you and follow your lead. And so what are the things that you need specifically in your relationship? I remember once I told one of my board members, I said, hey, I need you to speak a hard truth to me, but please be gentle, because I'm real sensitive right now. And that was my way of saying, don't push back on me. I know you probably have to push back, but man, I'm real vulnerable. And if you do it too hard, you're going to create a big wound. And I just, but I still need the truth. And so what are the things that you need to talk to your board members and write them down and just make it part of your vernacular?
No, that's fantastic tips. And also a good call out on, you have to come from an energy of vulnerability and to be open to what they're going to say. You're going to give them that permission, but you have to mentally take that in, that you need to be open to what they,
and sometimes it's like, hey man, I know what you're saying is true, but I'm really struggling. Thank you. And I need to go sleep on it because I really don't want to do that. I really don't want to say I'm sorry. Right. I know you're right. I know I need to, but man, I'm pissed. But thank you. At least I know that's the right thing to do. Now I need to go, do 100 push-ups to get ready to do this.
Yeah. So questions too on your career path, that it looks like you followed stuff that was not really a map or a radar. Did you sit down and start mapping out where you wanted your career to go? Has it been always, kind of following some type of feel or moments or coincidences?
Man, that is an awesome question. I'll tell you, the answer is absolutely not. I feel like the first part of my career was putting my trust entirely on people that I thought were really smart, and being open to follow really smart people. And actually, one of the things that I didn't know at the time that I think I was operating on, and I didn't have language until I was at Rackspace. I remember I have a great friend, former racker named AJ Rysam, and he had a mentor. And his mentor told him, AJ, you shouldn't be worried about what you're going to make this year or next year. You need to be worried about what you're going to make in 10 years. And the only way to do that is through skills acquisition. And that was a game-changing notion to me. And I realized that I did not map out where I wanted to be. But every time a new opportunity came, I realized two things. The people presenting it were really smart and I respected them. But the opportunity, and I didn't know this at the time, always presented new skills that I didn't have. I was going to learn a bunch of new stuff. And those two things are what dragged me all, in these different paths in my career. And I'll tell you this, I think that one of the great, I wouldn't say it's a lie, but one of the things that I think is wrong, especially in K through 12 education, is that K through 12 education is a linear progression, right? You pass the test, you go to the next grade, pass the test. And I would submit that your career is not a linear progression. Your career looks more like the Odyssey by Homer. There's a shipwreck involved. You're going to go backwards. My career was bagger, produce, bagger, checker, produce, receptionist, sales guy, terrible sales guy, account manager, account manager, account manager, account manager. I was account manager for 5 years. And so there's all these ups and downs in your career. And sometimes you go down to go up. I took a $50,000 pay cut when I left Rackspace, but my title was better at the startup. But, it was just, I went down to go up And so I think that, you can make a plan, and sometimes that works. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I just would submit that I have found that if you write down the most successful people you admire and you try to map out their career, I don't think it was a linear progression. I think it's this grand adventure. And so for me, I think that the two things that I would say your compass are smart people do brilliant things, brilliant people surround themselves with other brilliant people, and skills acquisition. I was offered 2 director jobs at Rackspace, and at the same time once, really awesome. And the way I made the decision was I said, this one will give me more skills than this one. And that's how I made the decision. And I'm glad I did, because I still use those skills. But that's such a great question. I'll tell you now, in my career now, I'm trying to map it out. And it's so funny because I feel like the forces of the universe are laughing at me. Like I'm trying to go, I want to do these 10 things in the next 10 years. And it's like, the universe is like, sorry, buddy. But I'm trying to do it. And look, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a plan, right? I think, have a plan. I think that's, there's a plan to win is better than not. But I think be open to the adventure that your career will take you on.
No, great advice. So what happens if there's an empty seat on your board? What's the best way to fill it?
I would say don't. If you have one, I would say this is the greatest decision, the most, you get to crown and knight someone. Don't give it away. It's not, raise the price, quadruple the price of it. If you just have one and everyone else is asked, okay, just stick with one. I just think that to me, it's too valuable to give it away to people that don't deserve it or that are less deserve it. I think that it's such a special group. And the beautiful thing is that unlike a job, you can interview people for a lifetime before you let them be on your board. You can interview them for years, right? And the way you interview them is to say, let me get your advice. There have been people, I've gotten their advice for years, and I'm still like, I'm not sure. But advice is free. And it also allows me to see how their brain works and where they're coming from. And I just don't think there's anything wrong with trying before you buy for years.
Yeah. Because you do talk about a lot of mutual relationships within your board. Is that something that you've started out with, or is that developed over time? It sounds like there's some reciprocity between some of your board members.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that, for me personally, there's a couple things that are always very important to me. I have positivity and woo in my top 5 strengths. And so I need people that are not afraid to fight me, but also package it in encouragement. Hey man, you're being an idiot, but you're better than this. You have more potential than this. You can be an amazing blah, 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 but you're wrong. I run off and need encouragement. And so these are the things, and all the people that are around me, I just sort of gravitated to those people. But there are people that are just flatterers, and I don't want to surround myself with a flatterer. And so the people that I've chosen, especially, I just happen to be close to them. A lot of them were people that I was forced to be around physically, which is why I think Rackspace is such a great place, is you're forced to be around someone for long periods of time. You get to see their work ethic. They get to see you. You get to see their quirks. And then you go, hey, you know what? If this person, I feel like I mesh well with their worldview, but also they're just coming at it from a totally different place. And so I think it's just different for everybody, but you have to be really in tune with what you need. And then go find people that really relate to it. I mean, there are some people that are really direct that are on my board, and I have to manage those conversations. It's not up to them. I just say, hey, I know you're going to come in at a 10. Please give it to me in 6.
I'm running the meeting today, and this is how we're going to do it.
Because you'll just run me over, And actually, it's funny. It's funny too. My number 34 strength is competition. And I think my 33 is command. But I have several command strength finders, people on my board, because I actually crave and love their directness. It doesn't waste time. I don't have it. They're not afraid of the conflict. But I also qualify them as saying their command is not going to stab me with words. and murder my self-esteem and tell me how stupid I am, their command will get to the point and it's done in a way that won't hurt me. And I need that because I don't have it.
Awesome. We're going to take one last question and look to see how we can wrap this up, because I know we're coming up on time. Thank you. Lorenzo, we talked before we were kicking things off on the importance of paying it forward. So, what type of role do you play, and what advice do you give? Because I'm sure you're on other people's boards.
Sorry, will you tell me that? Reframe that one more time.
Yeah. So we talked about paying it forward before we kick things off. So I'm sure that you serve on other people's boards. What advice do you give, and what role do you play on other people's boards?
Yeah, I think that it's very there's an old sort of biblical term, equally yoked, which I really like. It's this whole notion of two oxes being yoked with the same thing. And I just think that I think that it's a better picture of what it means to be on a board. Is I want to be equally yoked with someone, which means that I want to deposit as much as I withdraw. And I think that would be my advice. Is there are so many people out there that are just here to withdraw from you, and they're draining. You avoid them. And so I think when you're on a board, you want to deposit probably even more than you withdraw. And so, when I'm on a board someone's board, I always have to remind myself that there are times when I'm tired, but I've committed to this relationship of being on someone's board. And so I show it with action. You have to be there for someone even when it costs you something. And a lot of times it's going to cost you time. A lot of times it's going to cost you, a coffee or whatever it is. But, I don't think it's this passive relationship. I think you have to work really hard, like all relationships. And so when I'm on a board with someone, I have to intentionally carve time, because, you'll always find that the board calls happen at the most inopportune times. Someone goes through a dramatic thing, an event, an argument or whatever, and they need you right then and there. And so it's being available and figuring out how to fit that into your world. And so, but I would say that my advice to your question is just make sure that you are depositing energy into them, as much or more than you withdraw.
Oh, thank you. Those are excellent words to end on. So Power members and Rackers, thank y'all so much. This is recorded. We will send this out. And to those questions we didn't get to, we will try our best. You got a ton of shout outs from former Rackers. People
that's why I stutter stepped there. I was reading some of the comments and I was like, oh my God.
Oh my God. Yeah. The reason that we have flags is because of this man. He has left a legacy and a fantastic handprint and footprint across our company. So thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for giving us this time today, Lorenzo. The call to action for all of us is to make sure we know who's on our board. Go ask, go let people formally know. Y'all take care and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.